Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of Find Your Film. I'm a bit nervous because my mentor, one of my very best friends, my sensei, Eric, what is it? A sensei is the dojo master. Bruce, what do you call him? The inspiration, the North Star. What do we call this guy?
I don't think master is a good word to use these days, but the rest of them I think are fitting.
Okay, we are welcoming to the show our good friend Anderson Cowan, co-host of the CinemAddicts podcast, the Film Vault. Oh yes, sir, Anderson Cowan. Yes, director of Groupers.
I thought you were talking about Eric with all that stuff.
Oh no, I don't.
I just assumed.
We try not to mention Eric because he's every other week he tries to put in a Kirk Douglas movie every other week, and he outshines me when it comes to being a movie buff. So Eric Holmes has done a really great job, and I don't know.
Ace in the Hole. We got to Ace in the Hole yet?
Oh yeah.
Have we done Ace in the Hole? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what.
Yeah.
Eric
When you said master, I just assumed you were talking about Eric. We got a delay here, guys. I'm sorry. I apologize. But when you said master, I assumed you were talking about Eric. That's all.
No. But also, Anderson, I've learned a lot from you regarding indie film and all kinds of film. From Bruce Perky, he's taught me a lot about Italian giallo films as well. I know Dario Argento, Mario Bava. So I've done outside the whole cinematics world, Anderson. I've learned a lot about cinema from Bruce and Eric. But we're here today to talk about Anderson's main cinematic obsession, and that is Stanley Kubrick. First off, Anderson, I'm going to throw this to you. And do you remember the first time you actually fell in love and knew that Stanley Kubrick was going to be, we're talking about North Star, kind of pretty much your North Star when it comes to filmmaking and filmmakers?
You know what? Sadly, I don't have a good story here. He's kind of omnipresent. He was always there for me. It seems like I was always aware of him because I first came across a Clockwork Orange when I was 5, maybe 6, but I would, if I had to bet, it was probably 5 years old. It was the first time I ever saw that, thanks to my horrific babysitters at the time. And I remember my parents left and they said, okay, enjoy. And they had a couple like Betamax tapes set up for us to watch movies that night. My brother was younger than I was. He was like 2.5 or something. Then as soon as they left, I remember my babysitter saying, F that. No, we're watching this. And then he popped in a Clockwork Orange. And I remember I was in and out and I was trying not to watch too much because it was really freaking me out.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Do you guys, Bruce, Eric, do you have any Clockwork Orange stories? Because I remember, you would know this, Anderson. I used to live in this area called West Hills. Okay. And there was a big hill. Right. And I used to I used to have a house on the top of the hill. I would walk from my local VHS store. And when my parents were gone, I snuck in I believe it was an X-rated copy of a Clockwork Orange on VHS. And while they were gone, I actually traversed from my mini mall all the way walking up the hill on a hot Los Angeles day with the VHS of Clockwork Orange. And I snuck it in. Probably 12, 13 years old, but I wasn't 5. Still, it really shaped me to the miscreant I am today. Any of those kind of yes, sir.
I just realized that you're not getting my good audio. You're just getting my earbud audio, and this microphone is for nothing since I'm not recording from my end. So sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Are you going to put the good audio, or should we just be blessed with that audio? I don't know.
I'll send you what I got, but I don't think you can mix it in. So if it's all one, but whatever. Sorry.
I can't. Or I can.
Wires exposed.
Yeah, if I send you mine, could you mix it in? No, probably not, right? Probably not.
I'll talk to you after. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the listeners that
listeners
how the sausage is made.
Yeah, listeners. Here's a first. Anderson and I, whenever we tape cinematics, we never talk afterwards. So this will be a first. Thank you, Anderson, for the talk after we stop recording.
No, we talk. I always say get out.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Thank you. As I'm sweating bullets, Bruce, Eric, any early Kubrick memories before we get into our 2 films for this episode?
Well, so The Shining, that was always one that was always playing in the house, usually on like HBO or something. Clockwork Orange, for that matter. And then, when I was in high school, pretty much there were 3 movies: Romper Stomper, Repo Man, and Clockwork Orange. No matter where I went, no matter what. Anytime anyone would put on a movie, it was one of those 3 movies. It got to the point where I was sick of all 3 of them. I was like, oh, fuck this again. Come on, like literally anything else. And so thankfully, that was decades ago. And I've kind of got to rediscover all 3 of those movies and without, feeling like they were thrusted upon me. And so.
But it's funny, you got sick of them, but did you realize now those 3 films pretty much shaped how maybe your movie taste at an early age and still?
Well, hopefully not Romper Stomper too much. Actually, Now that I think of it, hopefully not
fuck
Clockwork
Russell
Orange.
Crowe.
But yeah, I mean, they're all three of them are great movies. It's just, you know, the thing, like if you eat pizza every day, as great as pizza is, it's like, fuck, can we literally eat anything else right now? But
are you equating Kubrick's library to pizza? How dare you?
Okay, you can eat steak every day, and eventually you're gonna be like, this steak and these two pizzas are. but yeah, it was so. Clockwork Orange, definitely one that was on heavy rotation and kind of went away from my life for a long time, and then got to come back to it. So that's been kind of fun.
And you, Bruce, early on was, yeah, we'll get him back. Bruce, early on, were you was that a big part of you, Kubrick, when you were a teenager? Maybe even early, like 5, when Anderson was 5. You know, was it like that for you, or how was it for you?
Well, I'm a lot older than Anderson, so I wasn't 5, but it was probably about the same year. No, The Shining was the first one because my friend's basement had like HBO and Showtime. So we tried to sneak in. We looked for any movie with nudity, and The Shining had nudity, but that was a little bit disappointing in the nudity department. It was a little bit messed up. But then I remember a few years later, I got the VHS of Clockwork Orange, was watching it at home. Had not seen it before, so I was watching it in the living room. Mom came by while they were beating the homeless dude in the tunnel, and immediately was like,
"Men spinning around the earth."
Yeah. They immediately said, "Turn that crap off," which I, of course, returned to later that night and watched the rest of. So, yeah, that's kind of my memory of Clockwork Orange.
And Anderson, it's very interesting for this episode, instead of going Clockwork Orange or 2001, the obvious Kubrick ones, or my all-time favorite film, and probably arguably Stanley Kubrick's best film, I dare say Barry Lyndon, right? Oh, okay. Listeners, Anderson just made a motion, north and south, but you can imagine what that is. Anderson, can you tell our listeners why in the world are you choosing Spartacus and Lolita as far as the Kubrick episode? Why?
Why am I choosing that? Because Eric told me we should choose those. But
Eric, what the? Yes.
I think they're. At first I was like, these two really, but then I'm like, you know what? It's a pretty good spot to start with because it's Spartacus is what made Kubrick who Kubrick is, and is sort of. Well, that's not really fair, but Kubrick, it's what kind of birthed Kubrick into the world of cinema, and then it was his first and last studio picture, as a lot of you probably know, and it was such a terrible experience for him that he fled the country and ended up making his first of many independent films, and that first one was Lolita. And today, if we look at Lolita, or even 20 years ago when I first discovered Lolita, or maybe it's longer ago than that, you think it's kind of tame and it's kind of cutesy and whatnot. But at the time in 1962, it was actually 1961 is when he started to make this on the heels of Spartacus. People thought that he was crazy. People thought that he was insane because it was such a taboo book to begin with. It was so controversial, and no one dreamt of actually making a motion picture out of it. And the fact that he was going to do so was about the most punk rock thing he could do as this coming out. I'm independent. I'm not going to be working underneath the studio system anymore. So it's a nice double feature in that sense, because it shows what he did when the studio had him by the balls, and then what he did first on his own. But we should also mention that he made independent movies before Spartacus, but Spartacus was kind of where he finally broke through.
Yeah. Now, a little bit of background on Spartacus, released in 1960, obviously directed by Kubrick. I think the original director behind Spartacus, I could be wrong, I didn't do any research, but out of memory, I think it was Anthony Mann was the original director behind Spartacus. Okay, Spartacus won 3 Oscars, Best Actor in a Supporting Role. That's Peter Ustinov, very, very good. Best DP, Best Cinematography was Russell Meddy, and Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design. So I think pretty much everyone knows the story behind Spartacus. It centers on the titular character, and it's his journey from slave to gladiator to trying to go up against Rome. That's pretty much the story. It's based on a novel by Howard Fast, screenplay by blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo. I'm sure Anderson's going to have some Trumbo references. In fact, Anderson played me this amazing Trumbo situation regarding his thoughts on co-star Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis is one of the stars of this movie as well. Just before I'm going to throw this to you, Anderson, in a second. This is the first time I've seen Spartacus, Anderson, and I can't believe it's taken me so long. I'm sure Eric Holmes, since Kirk Douglas is one of your favorite actors, you've probably seen this movie a couple of times. I really enjoyed this movie. My only caveat is any scene with Kirk Douglas and co-star Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons plays Spartacus's love of his life. She's a fellow slave. She's beautiful. Any scene with Gene Simmons, love her as an actress, with her and Kirk Douglas, any love story part of Spartacus made me want to hurl. I felt so dated. I wanted to cry. I'm sure because Kubrick is way more intelligent than I can ever be. I'm sure he even saw these love scenes, these love moments, and he probably wanted to puke on his shirt. Anderson, on your rewatch, your thoughts on Spartacus? Has it grown in stature for you?
No, I always loved Spartacus. I don't think of it as a Kubrick movie so much as just a really good Hollywood story that was made back in the day under the studio system, and it was an actual Warner Brothers direct response to Ben-Hur. I don't remember which studio put out Ben-Hur, but that was their response to Ben-Hur. They were trying to do their own Ben-Hur with Spartacus, and the whole story as to how Kubrick came to be a part of it was he had done Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas before, and Kirk Douglas was butting heads with Anthony Mann, and he really wanted to get a director in there that he could vibe with better. He didn't realize that, I don't know how, this is on Kirk Douglas, but he didn't realize that Kubrick was the mad genius that he was, and that he was as controlling as he was. So he thought he would get this wonder boy in there that he could kind of control. Kirk Douglas, that is, thought that he could control Kubrick, and then he immediately started butting heads with Kubrick as well. But where was this question from? Where do we begin? Oh yeah, so I don't think of it as a Kubrick film. Where I really see Kubrick influences yet are in the big battle sequences, which aren't a huge part of the movie. But once we get there with the sheer scope, and he does get some of that single point perspective with some of those battle sequences with the mass armies that were assembled by the Romans. That feels grand and Kubrick and genius. Most of it, though, as you can tell by seeing it on your first time, Greg, it feels like a pretty standard studio picture. There's nothing that would make you want to look up this director if you had no idea who it was, right?
Well, I think probably the first act was my favorite part of it, when the gladiator part, when he's picked up and he's goes to gladiator school. I'm not gonna throw a joke. I'm a pretty straight guy, but seeing guys and men, just fighting in swords and working out for an hour, I probably wouldn't be my kind of thing. But I really loved just the character building in this. Woody Strode.
You prefer oysters, is what you're saying?
Yes, there's an oyster scene we're gonna get to in a second where what's his face, Laurence Olivier, he plays Crassus, one of the Roman senators or one of the Roman power guys. He asks his servant, played by Tony Curtis, Antonidas, I think, if he likes what Anderson, snails or oysters?
Snails or oysters, yeah.
Snails or oysters. This goes back to I want to throw it to you guys, Eric and Bruce. Snails or oysters? Bruce told me he likes the entire smorgasbord. I don't know what that meant until I saw Spartacus. So Bruce, power to you on that. But do you guys think that the snails or oysters line is probably something that wouldn't have been done if, let's say, William Wyler, the director of, I think, Ben-Hur, or Anthony Mann, you know what I'm saying? This feels like a Stanley Kubrick type of line that only could have been done because it was Stanley Kubrick, the snails and oysters line, which basically is a reference to Olivier's asking Curtis's character if he likes men and women, essentially. The snails. I
mean, given the audio that we've heard, the Dalton Trumbo audio, I'm assuming that's got to be all Trumbo, right? Because wasn't he pretty?
Yeah, I think that's Trumbo.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
I put a period there. You stop the fucking sentence, otherwise it's fucking garbage.
Yeah, you mean Trumbo, right? Of course.
So good.
But
what Eric's alluding to, and yeah. Bruce, have you got a chance to see this? Because I've seen Spartacus probably 4 times, and I'm like, I love Eric, I love Bruce, I love Greg, but I don't know if I can watch Spartacus again because it's so goddamn long, and then follow it up with 2.5 hours of Lolita again. And boy, oh boy, was I excited to find this Spartacus on the Criterion Collection, and they have just a regular Spartacus up there. They have one with Kirk Douglas doing, and some of the producers, I think, doing some commentary, and then they have one where it's notes from Dalton Trumbo's first viewing of the first rough cut, and they are all transcribed, obviously, and read by an actor who sounds like Joe Frank a little bit, and a little bit like Bryan Cranston, the actor who reads his notes, and they're very telling as to how Dalton Trumbo felt about the rough cut and the directorial choices that were made, and certain actors, and it was a really, really fun watch. And anyone who likes the behind the scenes of how writers actually feel about their work once it's produced, I think this is probably the standard to take a listen to and watch the movie along with those notes read. It was fantastic.
Of course, Anderson mentioned Bryan Cranston. He sounds like a mixture of Joe Frank. I believe Joe Frank and Bryan Cranston. Of course, Cranston played Trumbo in the movie Trumbo. Bruce, Eric, your thoughts on Spartacus upon the rewatch? Are you as high on the movie as Anderson is?
I love Spartacus. That was like that was one of the later Kubrick movies I've seen, because it just felt like homework. I keep hearing Anderson talk about Barry Lyndon, and I got to tell you, you're not selling me on it.
You're cutting out, Eric. You're cutting out on the Barry Lyndon thing. I don't know.
I'm gonna pull the trigger on it eventually, but Spartacus was one of those like, oh god, I don't want to fucking watch Spartacus. But then like in the past couple of years, I really gotten into Kirk Douglas, and it's like, it's fucking Kubrick and Kirk Douglas. Fuck him. Dalton Trumbo wrote it. Fuck. Okay, I'll watch it. And I watched it. I'm like, this movie's pretty fucking good. Like I was expecting it to be homework through and through, and it just kind of moves.
And Bruce, you were saying how this movie is pretty much, and you I think you took a shot on Ridley Scott's Gladiator. You're saying this is the Gladiator that Ridley Scott wanted to do. Are you that high on Spartacus? Eventually, you said that to me.
Bruce.
In.
Yeah,
Bruce, when Gladiator first came out and I was covering it on the film ball, I was saying the exact same thing. I said, 70.
He's agreeing with me. I'll just say that. Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, if the first third of this movie is the good Gladiator, you can watch the first third of this movie as its own piece if you want, till they escape from the Gladiator school, and you could make that a movie on its own. I wanted to point out something I thought about this too. We're talking about Kubrick's touch. I like this movie quite a bit, but I agree there's definitely some slow parts. Every time it's a holiday or Hollywood set and there's the romantic stuff, that's kind of annoying. Talking about where do you think Kubrick kind of shines through in this movie, definitely believe like what Anderson's saying, and some of those giant epic battle scenes. I love the fact that there's thousands of actual extras there in formation, but even more so, and I would question you guys on what you think. The scene where Laurence Olivier's character,
Precious,
basically they come with their dates and they force people to fight to the death to impress their dates. And the way that whole scene plays out, that seems to me like Kubrick right there. He is basically just saying, like, look at these like sordid fucks who are just having a good old time. And there's even the point in that scene where they're fighting to the death, and they start just talking about business. Like they're even so bored by it. They're not even like watching it. And I thought that whole scene, and when they're picking out who gets to fight, that all seems very Kubrick to me. I don't know what you guys think, but to me,
I wonder how much of that though is because Kubrick, like his movies always had that kind of, you think the story is one thing and it's actually like, kind of turn it on its head a little bit and kind of sort of has fun with that. But this wasn't his project. He was hired onto this project. And granted, he could have like read the script and said, no fucking way, and just walked off. But I wonder if it's just like the universe coming together, like where it just kind of accidentally worked out that way. Because again, with the Dalton Trumbo, he's like real precious with his words, which quite honestly, you don't want to do that if you're a writer, because sometimes sometimes you get Kubrick directing your words and they'll make them better. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, but it just seems weird that he would be involved in this, and things are very Kubrick within the story, but that's not necessarily something he brought to the table, or maybe it was. I don't know.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Trumbo, okay, is a brilliant writer, obviously, but there's a couple of gutsy, ballsy things that Kubrick did with. I think, even though with this is a commercial film from Kubrick, a couple of things. Howard Fast, the novelist. It's based on the novel by Howard Fast, the story of Spartacus. Howard Fast was a blacklisted writer. Trumbo was blacklisted. The fact that Dalton Trumbo's name in the middle, in that blacklist, his actual name was actually on the opening credits, pretty ballsy for Kubrick. Bruce Berkey mentioned the death sequence, the fight to the death sequence between Spartacus, obviously played by Kirk Douglas, versus Woody Strode. Any other filmmaker, I argue, that death sequence would have been played with Spartacus winning that match. Nope. In typical, I know it's a Trumbo screenplay, but I mean, I'm sure Kubrick probably this is something that comes out of Kubrick, where the showdown between the supposed protagonist and antagonist goes in a completely different direction, because the hero of that moment isn't Spartacus, it's Woody Strode. He decides to flip the script. That's something that Stanley Kubrick has done throughout his career. He actually makes all these creatively bold decisions. The bisexuality scene with the snails and oysters, that was pretty gutsy in 60. So there's a lot of gutsy stuff that I think Kubrick did with Spartacus. Do you concur, Anderson, regarding that?
He's muted.
Oh, I think you're muted.
muted.
You've been muted, Anderson.
I saw him trying to talk and I didn't hear anything. I went down. I saw the.
Sorry, I lost connection for a second, and then I got back, and I guess it just defaulted to mute. So, which is a good catch, fail-safe to mute once you get disconnected. I've heard horrific things that have happened on Zoom. So, anyways, I don't know. I think that I might give that to you, Greg, if I had not recently seen the Dalton Trumbo commentary, where I watched that scene with his commentary and he didn't say anything about it, and I think he might have either A, he liked that Kubrick switched it and just didn't want to give Kubrick the credit, or B, he wrote it that way to begin with, and I feel like he probably would have said something if it was switched around, and he would have had something negative to say, because he did throughout. I mean, he was attacking Kubrick for his choices throughout that commentary. And it was before Kubrick was Kubrick, obviously. I kind of think that Kubrick wasn't Kubrick until he finished Full Metal Jacket, or 2001, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon to a lesser extent, and Full Metal Jacket. That's really what made Kubrick the mad, crazy genius and give him the reputation. If he stopped making movies after Dr. Strangelove, I think he would have been thought of as a great director, a very good director, possibly great. And, he had some quirky styles and whatnot, but he wouldn't have been considered the all-time great if it wasn't for the ones that he followed up with that all have different tones. But we're not talking about that right now. And before we move on from the action sequences that both Bruce and I noted, if I recall, there were some cheats there. There was some matting and some very early technical tricks that they used to make the battlefield look even more filled with people than it really was, because they just couldn't afford, even that big production couldn't afford all of those. But I remember reading about that. I don't hold my feet to the fire there, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But something that is very Kubrick throughout this movie, and I think if it was left to Anthony Mann or if they brought on another director, is the comedy throughout. And that is something that I really respond to with Kubrick. I respond to so many things with Kubrick, but he always had such a wry sense of humor with all of his work. And there is Peter Ustinov also gets credit for writing most of his own lines, but what Kubrick did for a long time was allow really funny, great actors to kind of do their own thing. You see with Peter Sellers a lot right after he made Spartacus. And if he thinks somebody's really good and really funny and can bring their own flavor, he let them run. Sometimes too often, I think, with Peter Sellers. But Peter Ustinov's character is always funny throughout this entire movie. And thank God, otherwise it would be much more of a slog. Eric talked about it being a little bit like homework, but I think that comedy really helped it along and go down smooth. And back to the fight to the death sequence, which may or may not have ended in the original script with Kirk Douglas winning or losing, with Gracchus, and I lose all their names with the ridiculous Greek names, but them talking, a great touch. It was such a great touch, and at the very least, Kubrick really leaned into that and said, "This is my kind of scene." And it's the equivalent of people looking on their phones today, while crazy shit's happening in front of them. They were just talking because they were so fucking jaded, like Bruce said.
Anderson, you mentioned anytime you bring up Training Day that it was actually Denzel Washington that directed it, even though it wasn't Denzel Washington that directed it. Or
he's got that reputation.
Or like Poltergeist, people say, no, that wasn't Tobe Hooper. That was total Steven Spielberg. But I mean, Kirk Douglas, he's known as a producer, but you got basically three people that are known for being control freaks all working together, and it's kind of amazing how that even turned out as well as it did.
Yeah, I wish I knew how many times Kubrick just gave in and compromised and allowed things to happen. I would imagine a lot of times, if he just ran the set the way that he wanted to, we would have seen a different movie, and he wouldn't have fled to England after this experience. So we know that he had to compromise on a lot of stuff, and I would think that a lot of the stuff that Bruce cited as far as the gross Hollywood stuff, that was the love stuff, and Greg, you also said some things about that. with the soft focus on her and all that stuff, I would bet that he just kind of said, all right, you know what, you can do this stuff, Kirk, and I'll take this other stuff. And Kirk is such a fool for thinking he worked for an entire film on Paths of Glory with Kubrick, and then that's the guy that he wanted to bring on to be his puppet. Like, how was he not aware enough that wasn't a smart move if he wanted to, take over the set?
I will say this on Kirk Douglas's defense. I think he actually made some concessions. First of all, in Spartacus, you don't get to see Spartacus actually be a badass in battle. I mean, there is that final scene, but under any other circumstance, let's say it's Anthony Mann directing Burt Lancaster or Gary Cooper in a Sword and Sandal epic, you'll see them right in the middle of the fray, killing 10 to 20 people. And in Spartacus, you don't really see him really become this great superhuman fighter, which is awesome. Douglas probably, other than those scenes with Simmons, he doesn't have really many lines in this movie.
Also, to be fair, I mean, it's kind of hard to outshine those rolling flame logs. I mean, those still show. It's
amazing. And then he doesn't give a big speech. Doesn't give the big friggin' battle speech we've come to just know. Like, oh my God, here comes a speech. No speech.
Everyone else did it for him.
Right. And I think I don't know whether it's going back to Anderson and what you were saying, Eric.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
No, but it's the same thing. We can credit Trumbo, but we got to credit Kubrick for not having that big monologue, and maybe Douglas a little bit for not. I don't know, Bruce, what do you think? Not having that big monologue, maybe Douglas had a hand in saying, hey, let's just tone it down a bit. Or do you think maybe give the credit to someone like Kubrick or not?
I think it's Kubrick and Trumbo more on the because this is kind of the anti-biblical epic, right? This is the very political and dour, almost a parable for the whole Blacklist thing, right? That's part of Trumbo's thing with this, the whole I'm Spartacus. You have to call out other people and sacrifice somebody and
name names.
Do it. Yeah. So that's pretty obvious. But I would say that the only things I read about Kirk Douglas specifically changing things, I read that he specifically wanted to do the thing where he hamstringed the guy, he bit him, and he specifically wanted to do the part where he drowns the guy in the pot of stew, because he wanted, I think, Spartacus to be a little tougher. So my guess is that he wanted to have more of what you're talking about. And the script and Kubrick probably pulled it back because they kept, if you think about it, it's a pretty defeatist, heroic tale. I mean, the only real glory he gets is that when he's crucified on the cross, he gets to actually see his child for a second before he dies. I mean, that's pretty dark,
I think one of the themes of this movie, though, and they were pretty leaned real heavy on that. Death isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. There's more than a couple lines where it's like, no, just go in there. They're gonna, just let me kill you and do it quick, and then these fuckers won't have the joy of watching us fight each other.
But that's not the Hollywood version of this that you usually see, right?
Once again, Bruce, I think it's like Dalton Trumbo kind of bleeding through too, and it's about legacy more than it's about like maybe you can kill my name, but I'm still making movies that people are going to see 100 years from now, so my legacy will live on. And that's why there could be something there.
That's why I think that in a way, even though Trumbo hated probably what Kubrick was doing, I think they're kind of a good match in a sense. Like their sensibilities to some degree, at least philosophically, kind of work here, even if it's not artistically. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That was one of the notes that Trumbo gave actually on the hamstring scene. He didn't like that the guard said my leg or something, or he's like,
ow, my leg.
It should be ankle. I'm like, and he's like, it should say ankle. He should be saying, ow, my ankle. And it's like such a tiny little, that's part of the leg. It works still. You don't have to call that out. Trumbo, what was interesting is he was calling for all sorts of things that would have demanded massive reshoots with tons of extras. And he was just like writing it out as though it would be a simple fix, but it was stuff that was already shot as far as, but it's a little bit confusing what we're actually seeing, because we're seeing something different than what Trumbo was seeing at the time, because he was seeing the rough cut. But I don't know if they did a month's worth of reshoots, which is what would have been called for if Trumbo got all of his notes exhausted.
What would have been great is if they had the Trumbo cut of Spartacus, where it was like a little picture of Trumbo sitting here. I said leg right there. Actually, should have said ankle. So just so you know, the writer's bullshit, and that just roll the picture. I don't even care anymore.
Here's another example. This is big Spartacus or small Spartacus. Like he went back to that a lot.
Oh my God. I got to listen to that audio. Now the movie
It's great. It's really great.
Yeah, the movie ends with Varinia, played by Gene Simmons, and her baby, which is Spartacus's baby. Spartacus has just killed his surrogate son, Antonidas, played by Tony Curtis. They actually have a face-off, and the reason why Spartacus kills Tony Curtis's character Antonidas is because he doesn't want Antonidas to be up on the cross. So at the end of the movie, Spartacus ultimately is crucified. The good thing about it is Varinia is led out of the city, out from under the clutches of Crassus, played by Laurence Olivier. Varinia and her baby. They go out in the morning and she sees Spartacus on the cross being crucified on his dying moments. The good thing about it is Spartacus, like Bruce says, gets to see her and the son one last time. That's the final moment of Spartacus. Anderson, how does that moment at the end play for you? And want you guys to chime in as well at the ending of Spartacus.
I kept waiting for Ustinov to say, "Hey, what are you doing over there? Get back over here." It was nice that she got her little moment. And it is such a bleak ending, and it's so bittersweet that he gets to see, his legacy, which is what the kid is, right? For one brief moment, but it's still so tragic that's the only moment of fatherhood he's going to get, and that affected me more than it had any other time I'd seen it, because this is the first time I'd seen it since becoming a parent. And I've said numerous times that my movie viewing experiences weren't going to change at all once I became a dad, but that was me just being stupid, because it's really hard not to change the way you consume things when your whole life view has changed. So yeah, I put myself in that place up on that crucifix in that moment. And I don't want to say I got teary-eyed, but it affected me more emotionally than it ever had before.
Bruce, do you concur? You're a dad. Do you concur on the ending?
Yeah, I liked it. For many of the same reasons, and I'm a sucker for a bleak ending a lot of times too. One thing I also wanted to mention about that ending is I had read, I don't know if you guys read this, that I think the original cut, they didn't have the spot where she's like begging for him to die. And I thought that was a really, of the scenes they have together, that might be the best one.
I agree. That's a great scene. That is a great scene. Very good.
Because she's begging for him to die, just die. And they cut that out because, of course, it was too bleak. But that was like one of the true, like, actual honest kind of moments in that last shot. And then to have her, roll away with just the line of crosses going off into the distance and all the way up the hill. I mean, it's pretty epic.
You agree, Eric? Epic ending? Your thumbs up on that, on the ending?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's got it's kind of the you can have your cake and eat it too, or you got the bleak ending, but the character still gets that kind of happy ending moment, even though it's like he's in the middle of being crucified and he's dying. But like you get that, it's kind of like when you make a barbecue sauce, you mix it and it's just a little too bitter, but you just got to add a little bit of molasses and just make it just right. And I think it worked out pretty good.
Very cool. Okay, so we're going to move to Lolita in a second, but before we do that, final thoughts, Anderson, on Spartacus. Any just random thoughts regarding Spartacus?
I like Paths of Glory more.
Very good. Ooh, you like Paths of Bruce, Eric, you agree?
I think that might be my favorite movie. His
really?
Actually,
okay.
Paths of Glory is sweet.
Okay, Eric Holmes, you're disqualified. #Barry Lyndon. Go see that movie immediately. Just kidding. Okay, so now we're now at 1962, as Anderson says, and maybe I'm misquoting him, but after the studio system, after it's not a debacle, after his experience with the studio system, he decides he wants to make movies sort of with his own vision. He moves, I believe, Anderson to England. They make this movie called Lolita. It's based on the 1955 novel by Vladimir Nabokov. And it's considered one of the 20th century's best written novels. I've read about half of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful novel. I don't know why
I can't even finish it, Greg.
Because I and this is probably why I'm still single, is because I really can't finish anything. So that's probably why I'm still that. And one of these days I'm going to get to Lolita, the book. Here's a big reveal. I thought this movie I saw this when I was in my 20s, and it's basically about this middle-aged college professor named Humbert, played by James Mason, who falls in love with it says here on IMDb, 14-year-old nymphette, but actually, I think in the books she was 12. She was 12, but in this version, the Kubrick version, she's 14. Her name is Lolita.
Yeah, finally.
Lolita, and and she's played by Sue Lyon. So he falls in love with her, and the mother is played by Shelley Winters. That is the premise. Yes, that is the premise of the movie. I'll get to you guys in a second. I think this movie has really aged well. I was so blown away by how amazing this movie is. Also co-starring in this movie is Claire Quilt, is Peter Sellers as Claire Quilty, sort of the antagonist in the movie, who ends up probably, well, this is a spoiler episode anyway, who ends up squiring away Lolita, taking Lolita away from Humbert Humbert. So that is the premise story behind Lolita. Anderson, has this movie aged like fine wine for you, or has it actually aged in a negative fashion for you?
No, considering the subject matter, and this sounds horrible, but going from 12 to 14 might not seem like a lot, but it's actually a world of difference with a lot of young people. So I think that in today's very, very uptight and sensitive, and rightfully so in many cases, but if you told me that if I lived in a vacuum, and if you told me there was this movie from 1962 that was all about a middle-aged man falling in love with a 14-year-old girl, and it's actually funny and reverent, and you can learn something from it, and it's a great story, I would think like, wow, I bet that movie didn't age well. But you're right, it does. You can watch it today, still learn plenty from it. There's still plenty of things with that Kubrick wry sense of humor all throughout. I mean, this movie is funnier than I remember it being. I mean, it is. I haven't seen it in 10 years, and it's just funny throughout. They're just his reactions, him being crushed right to the very bleak ending. It's just funny, and I have to think that Kubrick realized how funny the movie was when making it. But yeah, I think it aged well.
Can this movie be made today with a 14-year-old? You think so?
It absolutely could. This is like, as far as Woody Allen biopics go, this thing nails it.
Okay.
I think Sam Neill would be a perfect Humbert.
Oh yeah. Sam Neill would be perfect, and probably someone like the lead actress from Bruce. You're good. Stranger Things. Help me out on that. The lead actress from Stranger Things.
Oh gosh.
Talent wise, yeah.
Number 11.
Let's just
Bobby Millie Brown.
Yeah. Do you think maybe Anderson should be good? No, or maybe she's
because I've seen her in movies where she has to speak, and she's not good. She's only good in Stranger Things because she has no lines.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna cut that out, Anderson, because we're gonna try to get a sponsorship from Netflix. So I'm gonna cut that out. Thank you so much for that comment. All right. I'm just kidding. So Bruce, Eric, has this movie aged well for you? Is it more potent today?
Yeah, this movie's freaking hilarious. I mean, just opening up when Woody Allen's about to kill Peter Sellers, and Peter Sellers just doesn't give two fucks about anything. He's like, yeah, we're gonna play ping pong. It's like, I'm here to kill you. It's like, yeah. Here's your paddle. Come on, let's go. The movie goes long, and it does the Woody Allen being a creep, and then it gets to the end, and then it ends right where it's not the first movie that did that, and probably won't be the last movie that did that. But this is the kind of movie that I could put on repeat, because the end just goes it just melds right into the beginning so well. It's just kind of I could just put this movie on a loop. It's hilarious, and it's definitely insightful. And the cool thing about the Lolita character is that she is a child, but you get to see her kind of grow. But you get to see her grow, and my niece is kind of getting that age, so I kind of see a little bit of her and Lolita, not the sexual stuff, but like the how she's kind of sort of becoming an adult and mentally changing. And I thought they did that really well in this movie too. And I'm guessing a lot of that credit probably has to go towards the actress whose name I cannot remember because I suck at life.
Sue Lyon. Sue Lyon is very good in this movie. Here's a sad thing about Sue Lyon. She was 14 when she did Lolita. She passed away in 2019 at the age of 73. She, in her final days, she was living in an assisted living home in North Hollywood. After the success of Lolita, her life, her career went downhill. She never became the star that she wanted to be. She married, I think, 4 or 5 times. And when they did a remake of Lolita, directed by Adrian Lyne in 1997, there was a round of interviews with Sue Lyon, and Sue Lyon was saying, Anderson, I just saw Anderson do a thumbs down on Adrian Lyne's Lolita. Anderson, by the way, a very good friend of mine. I hope he's not hearing that. How I think that the remake of Lolita is quite almost a masterpiece with Jeremy Irons. That's a double finger. Thank you, Anderson. You're a good buddy. But again, it goes to the point that she was 14 when she was doing this, and I wanted to actually throw this to you, Bruce. Do you think casting a 14-year-old Sue Lyon in a Stanley Kubrick film, where she is pretty much, I guess, from James Mason's perspective, the object of desire, the male gaze is upon her, and even as good as that closed set is, after the success of Lolita at 14 to be sexualized, and this is something, unfortunately, as a stupid male, I did not think recently until rewatching Lolita. Does any of that stuff go through your mind as far as the effects that it had on someone like Sue Lyon?
Yeah, that's a valid question, and there's been quite a few actresses, really young actresses. I mean, obviously you got Jodie Foster is a real common one you come up with, or Brooke Shields. That's kind of
Natalie Portman.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a good question to that. I mean, I don't think this movie is irresponsible with it as far as that goes, because that's kind of the whole point of the movie. I would say that I was struck on this viewing of it. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because if you watch it the first time, you're really stuck with the Lolita and him and his obsession and all that stuff. This is maybe my third time watching it, and this time I was really struck by how this is a great satire on the fakeness of the American version of this 50s idyllic life. And it is all about how much bullshit that is. And throughout, I mean, it's funny too, funny as hell. But I mean, just the mom who's really just horrible. And you've got the friends who are basically swingers, and they're trying to constantly kind of worm their way in there too. You've got Quilty, who's just, predatory from the beginning. Throughout, you see people who are just disgusting, and it's almost Blue Velvet level of kind of dismantling that 50s version of Americana. And I think it's really great about that, and doing it in a funny way and doing it in a subversive way, and then having a main character like played by James Mason who is despicable throughout. I mean, you got the scene where he's trying to decide how can I kill her? How can I kill her and get away with this gun? And then and there's that whole extended sequence, which is hilarious. And then it gets thrown into the air because she's discovered the diary, and he's lucky that she dies. I mean, it's something to behold.
Him going back to that scene, I don't remember that being as funny the last time I saw it, where he's downstairs making her a drink and trying to come up with this cockamamie story about how, it's just literature that I'm writing, and a lot of time I use names that are people that I'm familiar with. I mean, it was such a weak excuse. It was.
I disagree.
You hear about.
I do that all the time. I would do that all the time. That's a valid excuse, Anderson.
That scene,
especially if Shelley Winters was my wife, I would say the same thing. So.
If I heard that, I would have chewed gum vehemently.
I think it was Dennis Rodman. I think he was with Carmen Electra, and she walked in on him, and there was a woman literally riding him in bed, and Dennis Rodman said, "It's not what it looks like." I mean, it was as bad as that. It was as bad as that. But can we go back to the very beginning of the movie? So I was really paying attention this time, because it's the first time I've watched these two movies back to back. I might have done it back in '99. I went on this crazy Kubrick tear right before film school. I don't know why, but I get obsessive with things. And I had already loved Kubrick, but I decided to read, I think it was 4 different biographies about him at the same time. So I was reading them chapter by chapter and rewatching all of his movies in chronological order. And I bought Fear and Desire, which wasn't available at the time, for $200 on VHS tape, which was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Ridiculous. Worst money I've ever spent, because now it's available in good format on YouTube. He didn't want his first movie to ever come out. He didn't want the public to ever see his first movie, because it is pretty run of the mill and small. Anyways, all that aside, I was really paying attention to the very first scene in which he directed after giving up the studio system and breaking out on his own. And it was really interesting to see how he shed all of the excess and weight that is a Hollywood studio system, with the big giant Roman empire, coming down on the slaves, and how it's just mano a mano. It's just these two guys in this ramshackle house, and they're essentially on the battlefield, but instead of it being an actual giant, acres and acres of land with impossible amount of people, it's just two guys on either side of a very messy ping pong table, right? So that's the battlefield, and it's just got half drank drinks kind of randomly. There's nothing set up about it that would give you any kind of idea that it's obsessive compulsive like Kubrick kind of is known to be, but it's just kind of like, it's just these two guys. It was very boiled down. It's very distilled. And I think that was, some of that had to have been on purpose. I mean, I'm sure he was thinking, this is the first thing that I'm showing since the last thing, and I'm doing it my way. And that was very interesting. And I never picked up on that. And even to the point that Peter Sellers' character, Quilty, one of the first lines he gives, he says that he is Spartacus.
Yeah.
So he's drawing attention back to it. Right.
Do you think that Spartacus line is credited to Kubrick or credited to Nabokov? What do you think? What do you guys think?
Or Dalton Trumbo.
Or Trumbo.
or Peter Sellers. Who knows?
Yeah,
well, I think that it's noted that they said Nabokov like wrote the screenplay to this, but I think what actually remains of his screenplay is very minimal. I think that's pretty much known to be the case. I also wondered, did any of you get this impression? I never got it until I watched it this time. Is there a bit of a Citizen Kane like knock going at the beginning of this too? This giant palatial, like full of crap rich guy that's gone off the deep end. I just got this weird feel that he's kind of thrown something at Citizen Kane there too. I mean, obviously the Spartacus stuff is there. I don't know.
I didn't pick up on that, but that's.
I don't know. I think Kubrick was always kind of anti-aristocrats and excess, and I think that he had more of a communist type of more communist type beliefs. He probably would have been blacklisted if he stayed in the studio system. Even though that was towards the tail end of it, he might have brought it all back upon himself. But yeah, he was always taking jabs at higher officials and governments, and I don't know if it was a direct. I didn't pick up on that, but what I did pick up on, which is really interesting, because first time I saw this movie, I was 14, maybe 15. I was Sue Lyon's age, and I remember watching it thinking, wow, she was very attractive, and just kind of living vicariously through this sad older man to me, right? And Humpert, and and it was just kind of sad, and then she just kind of blew him off at the end, and it was just I kind of felt bad for him because he was kind of pathetic and he cared so much, because I'm watching it as a 14-year-old. I've seen it a couple times since then, and this is the first time I've seen it I'm pretty much his age now, and I watched it this week, and I'm empathizing with him, even though he's a despicable character, but I'm seeing how he's really madly in love with her, despite her age difference, and it was just a fling. It was puppy love for her, and that was striking to me in this movie, and it's so interesting how this movie goes down completely different depending on what age you are when you see it.
Yeah, because you matured.
Real quick though, I might disagree that he's madly in love with her. I think he's more obsessed with her. This is not like love in the sense of I care for you. This is this is a thing that I need to obtain.
Okay. I give you that. I absolutely, with the way that he treats her like an object, but that's probably the closest this man can ever come to love. What I'm saying is he cared for her much more intensely than she ever could have, to the point that at the end, she's just oblivious to his pain. Like it just didn't even occur to her that he might be in some kind of pain. Keep in touch.
Hey, you're a pedophile. I don't care.
You know what? I had a different read. So when I was around your age, Anderson, and I saw this, and then eventually I saw the remake, I was sympathizing with the Humbert character. Like, here's a heartbroken guy, he probably did something bad. Now, huge, really bad. Now that I actually have a brain and I'm older, the guy basically abused a child. And from that consequence, her mother died tragically. She never was able to go back and see her mom. So this is a young girl who's actually living a life of trauma that ultimately ends up being further traumatized by another man in Claire Quilty, because Claire Quilty wanted to put her in a quote unquote art film, which is pornography. And so ultimately, I think I look at this as a real, it's a satire. It's a look, like you said, Bruce, on Americana, the destruction of the moral ambiguity of Americana and the two-faced nature of maybe 50s culture. But also, I think in many ways, it's a look at the abuse of this young woman. And ultimately, what's interesting at the end of, I don't know, Anderson, at the end of this movie, it shows that it goes back to the beginning, which you have him, the steps of him about to kill Quilty, but then it ends with Humbert died of coronary thrombosis in jail while waiting for the trial for the murder of Quilty. But they never put several months later, Lolita dies in childbirth. And I wonder, I don't know, throwing it to you, Anderson, why do you think Kubrick didn't add that Lolita at the end of the Nabokov novel, she dies 2 months after? Do you guys have a theory on that?
I think it would work in a book form. I don't think it would work. I mean, that's a little bit too heavy for like a movie to end, especially the way that it ended. And while I said empathize, I could see his point of view better as being somebody his age. I was seeing it through his eyes more than I was seeing it through her eyes, because I was her age when I first saw it. So I wasn't like, my heart wasn't breaking for this guy. I thought it was very, very funny because he was so despicable. But I could see it from his point of view better than I could when I originally saw it, obviously. And if you were to end with two epilogues, where one is, you know, about him dying in jail and her dying of childbirth, I think that might have been a little bit too much.
Also, I think with if you had her dying during childbirth at that point of the story, it would probably come off as the story is punishing her for daring to leave him, which probably
the way it ends right now, it's bleak as can be, but it's funny. Which he ends movies in bleak ways, but they're morbidly funny somehow, right? Yeah. Same with Clockwork Orange. The way Clockwork Orange ends, that's a bleak ending for society, but it's great seeing Alex having so much fun with where he's about to go, right?
All I'm saying is the Jeremy Irons. Oh, go ahead, Anderson. Yeah. And
as far as like him coming along, from what I know from Loveline and 17 years in Loveline, and obviously we know a lot more about childhood trauma and this kind of thing, sexual abuse, than I think we probably did back in '67. And this is actually at the precipice of probably the most disgusting era in American history, anyways, as far as childhood abuse, which was the '70s, with, you know, everything was just sexually open and people were just having orgies in front of their kids and stuff. Like, it got real bad there in the '70s. This was kind of at the beginning of that with the whole free love thing. But she was probably traumatized before Humbert even came into their lives. That's why she was already, you know, kind of trying to look sexy and get that tan in the backyard. I'm not trying to put blame on the victim here. I'm just saying that she was already on that path because of horrible traumas that probably happened to her before the story even began.
Yeah, that's true. And it's just a succession of tragedies that happened to Lolita. It's weird that I was able to actually look at it from a different vantage point, as opposed to the male gaze for most of my life with watching Lolita. As, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can look at this movie. And maybe that's the reason why Kubrick wanted to direct it. It's such a very multi-layered storyline. So
this has nothing to do with the themes of the movie, but it's just a little part of Lolita that I really liked was the part where he's in the car and there's that car behind him, but he's having the heart attack. But you don't, in movies, even movies that came after this, the heart attack's like, oh, I'm having a heart attack, but they don't do that. Yeah. It's like, you know, he's just kind of doing this thing with his arm. They don't even mention it. And then him and Lolita are talking. It's like, what's up? It's like, I don't know. I don't know. I say my arm feels kind of weird. And then
she's like delighted. Oh, I know this. I think you're having a heart attack.
And she's like, are you feeling nauseous? And it's like, no, not so. Or yeah.
However, Eric, right before that though was the blowout, and I really hate that shot. I remember hating it every time I've seen this movie because he's such a perfectionist, Kubrick. And you hear that awful sounds, very loud, jarring sounds of the blowout, and then the shot is the camera static on the ground of a car, you know, coming to a stop right in front of the camera, and you can see all four tires are fine. Like not one of the tires has any problems, and that really bothered me. But then right after that was the very realistic heart attack.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't
like you said, he's a perfectionist. They did that on purpose. He's like, see all the four tires? This is imperfection because you're about to see perfection coming up.
Perhaps.
Well, you know what? My favorite little in joke is the summer camp for the girls, all girls summer camp.
Camp Climax.
Camp Climax. I mean, you get away with this in 1962? I don't even know if you get away with this today. Do you guys have any favorite little moments that are just hidden in Lolita you want to share?
I really like there's a lot of funny lines. I'll let Eric go next, but the one line that really struck me as one of the funniest lines is that when it's after Shelley Winters and James Mason are a couple now, and she keeps trying to like get him into the bed and all this kind of stuff, and there's that whole sequence going on, and she says something like, Humbert, you just touched me and I go limp like a noodle. It scares me. And he goes like, yeah, I know the feeling. And I was just like, that is so great. Oh my God.
Pretty much anytime Peter Sellers is on screen, I was laughing my ass off. Especially like when he sits down and he's like, I'm going to kill you. And he grabs the half drinking beer and like drinks it. It's like, someone put a cigarette butt in here. That's so unsanitary. I'm like, dude, you're drinking a half drinking beer bottle. It's been sitting out all night.
Yeah, that was funny.
My smoking
with a gun in your face.
Wait, how about the scene? Peter Sellers, when he's pretending to be the cop at the convention with his back turned, that is one of the weirdest fucking monologues I've ever seen. It's
that's
so
very well
funny.
Yeah. And then what about the guy at the front desk at the policeman's
really creepy
Mr. Swine at the policeman's ball? And they made sure that like you could see his name placard. He was referred to as Mr. Swine like 3 times. We get it. His name's Mr. Swine, and he's at the police.
Well, they also had that. They also had that moment where they were unfolding the bed, and it was like a Three Stooges bit.
Yes,
and then, it worked. As I'm watching that, I'm like, dude, this is Kubrick. Like he has this mystery about him that's like the most perfect filmmaker ever. You know, like everyone's like holding him to this like high esteem, and he's doing a Three Stooges bit in the middle of a movie about a little girl that basically gets raped by an older man.
Yeah.
But, dude, you know what's interesting about that? I thought about that too this time because that was really stuck out to me, and I had forgotten about that scene. And I think we talk about all the ways that we take Humbert in this movie and how he's like obsessed and he's in love with her and all this stuff. But I think that's kind of, that scene is really key because it shows like the point of view on Humbert in this movie is he's a buffoon. He's a fool.
Yeah.
He is deluded. He is making everything the way he thinks it wants to be in his brain, but he's just an idiot. He really is an idiot when you look at him.
Bruce, that's a great point, and I think maybe that wasn't really that evident in the final movie. Maybe it is more so in the book, but he may not be attracted to, you know, prepubescent women or girls because he is a product of sexual abuse himself, which is often the case. Like a lot of time kids get, you know, boys get diddled with when they're really young, and then they're just kind of stuck in that age, and they can only like girls that are very, very young because that's the only thing that can arouse them. But then there's other guys that just have no game at all, and they can't talk to women their own age, and they can only prey on young girls who don't know any better. And I think that's probably what his character was, but he seemed kind of like a dashing leading man, right? So maybe that was a missed opportunity. They could have made him more like a Woody Allen without the reputation type guy, and then this might have even been more effective.
I mean, it does sound like a cartoon fox, so obviously kids are going to be drawn to him.
I think that's kind of the point, though, is by casting this dashing leading man and having him, it plays with your expectations, right? So you almost have to like get beyond what you see, because everyone, all the older women in the movie are all like always hitting on him. They're always like, oh, hey,
exactly,
let's go out. He's an idiot.
he's recoiling. He's physically recoiling from the whole situation. When
that's because he's not attracted to them. I mean, that's equivalent to him being attracted to those are his snails, and only the young girls are the oysters.
Oh, the oysters, yes.
Like that other funny scene, like he gets that whole tour of the house, and he's just trying to find an escape to not rent the house. You know, rent at that house. And he goes all the way down, and he finally gets there, and that minute he sees Lolita, and he's like, "Oh, okay. How much was it?" And then and then Shelley Winter says, she goes like, "Well, what was that convinced you? My garden?" And that whole scene is just hilarious.
No, they remember what he says. Remember what he says. What the kicker was, and it's a shot on Lolita as he says this. I think it was your pie, your cherry pie.
Cherry pie. Yes, that was an amazing scene.
So fucking out there. It's ridiculous.
Now back to like Sue Lyon being affected by this movie, and it's hard to tell because it was a completely different time, 1962. But I thought it was pretty tasteful. I mean, I remember the first time I saw this, like the movie ended, and I wasn't even sure if they had slept together. I had no idea if they were ever intimate. And obviously now I realize that they were, but they were pretty tasteful in the shots. They never had them even embracing. I mean, the closest they ever got was when he was on that cot and she was, talking above him and grabbed his arm to see what time it was. I mean, they weren't ever really seen in the same bed or actually, embracing in any scenes.
Oh,
yeah. Good point.
I just remember
Eric.
I just remember another great moment in there is at the drive-in. Oh, when he's sitting between the mom and Lolita. And the thing happens, and they both grab his hand, and he like takes his hand off hers, puts on Lolita's, and then she puts her other hand on it, and then the mom puts it on top of all of them, and then all three of them are like, "Oh, that got weird."
That was another scene. I didn't remember that. So when I saw that, obviously I've seen this. This is the fourth time I've seen it, but I did not remember Frankenstein, which I think that's what we were looking at, right?
Yeah, it
wasn't the original Frankenstein. Which one
Hammer.
was it?
Yeah, it's a Hammer movie. And I was like, a Hammer movie is in a Kubrick movie. And that right there is awesome. The Hammer, all those like Christopher Lee and all that shit,
And you read so much into every single choice that's made when you're looking at a Kubrick movie. You know, you're taken care of as an audience member, and they're not just doing things because they didn't just say pick a movie and put it up there, make sure it's kind of scary. Like there was thought and intention behind that, and I don't know what that thought or intention was, but you know, it got me thinking, and I didn't come up with anything. But like, why would Kubrick choose that clip?
The only thing I could think of is that Hammer was basically the change in. Was like it kind of was a harbinger of the change in movies in general, right? It was when all of a sudden boobs and blood became part of the American movie going experience. So once again, I think it's just another example of in this movie how he's showing kind of that change you're talking about, where you see these little cracks in this 50s version of Americana like changing, and it's just an excuse for them to be scared at the movies, obviously too. So
cool.
Yeah, this is you're talking about the cracks, and this is for him to be talking about that before the shit really hit the fan, pretty you know, prophetic, I think, as well. That this isn't so much Kubrick other than him being drawn to the material, but in the Nabokov drawing attention to this, and perhaps Kubrick, because I mean it was a Russian novel, right? And then Kubrick's the one who Americanized it with the film. But I remember not really being aware of that until seeing Far From Heaven, the Todd Haynes movie, and going, oh, like that really drew attention long before Mad Men, which was, you know, the decade after, but showing that, you know, the white picket fence and the happy, smiling consumer family is not all that you see on the surface. But it's right before, you know, family values really started to decay, right? 62.
With the Frankenstein thing, this is going to be a stretch. But Anderson's talking about predators are often born of past
trauma.
That's kind of what Frankenstein is. Something born of something. Dr. Frankenstein builds this monster, and then or builds this creature. Everyone sees him as a monster. You know what? I lost the thread, but I think there's something there.
I got one last thread before we close out this episode. Anderson, this was pretty much an episode I think hatched by our better Eric Holmes about Kubrick. He wanted you to be on the show to talk about your lifelong obsession with Kubrick. For listeners, what keeps you obsessed with Stanley Kubrick? You were obsessed since you were a kid, but now it seems, I would think most people that passion would decline as one gets older, but it seems you're still right in the thick of things. What keeps you going back to his research and to his work?
Well, it's the same thing. You know, once you get kind of locked in on something, especially if there's not going to be anything new from it. If Kubrick continued to make movies, much like Robert De Niro continues to make movies, maybe the balloon would have fallen off the rose, right? I might have had some decay there with my obsession and love. But since he died, right as his last film was being released, he's kind of frozen. Like in that time, you can never do anything wrong. And the initial obsession came from, he was a mad, mysterious genius who made movies that I responded to and laughed at. And that's a very good recipe for obsession, at least for me, for what I look for in artists and what I respond to. And if it wasn't for that very, very dark comedic style that he brought to all of his projects, I wouldn't love him nearly as much as I do. But he's also a shining example of the artist, the auteur, doing what the auteur wants to do. And it's so funny because he's probably considered the greatest auteur of all time, but he didn't write his own stuff. What he would do is he would take other people's material and make it his own time and time again, but he never had the balls. And perhaps this is just the business side of things, because he was a perfectionist and a genius in so many different areas, from computers to obviously film, to stories. He had the kind of mind where usually a really truly gifted person has they excel with logic, you know, and they're the kind of person that was like an IT guy that you hate at your job because he knows everything about your computer, or as opposed to the creative who, you know, doesn't know anything about technical stuff, but can write a really good story or paint a really good painting. He had it all encompassing. And then you throw the comedy on top of that. He's just perfect. And what I was starting to say is the uncompromising nature of his work, where he could make tweaks to things like Lolita or Clockwork Orange, or, you know, ultimately what he was going to do with AI is a great example, and get more asses in the seats, despite his, you know, he got a lot of people there because of his reputation, but he could have been like a real moneymaker. And he never really was throughout his entire career. He was never thought of as like box office gold. And it's because he stayed true to his vision. And I as as like the punk rock kid, and I know Eric and Bruce can appreciate that. Like, to stick with your morals and your ethics and believe in what you believe and tell the stories you want to tell rather than sell out to the man. I see Kubrick as being the good version of that and Spielberg being the bad version of that. And it's funny because they're always being crossed and compared. But Kubrick could have been probably the biggest commercial success. And what's crazy is that's what he set out to do. That's what got him in making movies to begin with. To go from still pictures to make motion pictures he saw a money-making opportunity. But then once he got into it, he I think gave into the perfection of his stories more than he did to the perfection of the box office.
True or false, Anderson Cowan, AI would have been a classic movie if it was just a Steven Spielberg film. True or false?
I think that might be true, as much as I hate to say
it. Is that right? I was joking. That was a joke. Are you kidding me?
No.
I was trying to get a rise out of you.
No,
buddy.
I think if Spielberg didn't have Kubrick in his head and he found that story on his own and he did it, and because Kubrick was good, he was supposed to be making the Aryan Papers, which was going to be like his Schindler's List. But then he found out that Spielberg was making Schindler's List, so he gave up. But can you imagine what movie that would have been? If he made a Holocaust, my God, a Kubrick Holocaust movie, we never got it because of fucking Spielberg. But at least it was a good movie. But no, if Spielberg came across AI, the story of AI on his own and had nothing to do with Kubrick, and he just made it, Kubrick, it's a really unfortunate thing because it was Spielberg's hands were kind of shackled with making AI. So he couldn't make a full Spielberg movie, which might have worked. He was trying to make a half Spielberg, half Kubrick movie, which is a Frankenstein movie. And it was awful. And it doesn't exist in my universe.
Would Anderson, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the whole reason that didn't Kubrick go to Spielberg because the idea was like, this seems like it would be a Spielberg movie more than it would be like something I would do. Like there
was a lot of back and forth. He was setting up to do it back in the early 90s, and then he saw Midnight because he took his time. He really took his time. Kubrick he's another one of these guys we're talking about on the last CinemAddicts, Greg. He was a victim of his own success, I think. And I think there was a voice in his head saying, you got to outdo yourself. His goal, well, this gets lost a lot, but his goal, especially after Dr. Strangelove, he wanted to make the greatest film from each genre. So that's why he did The Shining, and that's why he did 2001. He wanted to make the greatest sci-fi film ever made and then move on and make the greatest horror film ever made. He was looking to...
He got three of them in Paths of Glory.
Yeah.
War movie, prison movie, and courtroom drama. Three of the best ones all in one shot.
But he saw Jurassic Park, and he was so secluded at that point. And a lot goes into his seclusion and how crazy he was. And a lot has come out since then, since his death, from his family members and mainly his wife. His daughter actually is a Scientologist. They lost her to Scientology. It's kind of tragic. She came out here to Hollywood years ago, and she's a Scientologist now. But his wife, talks about how much he cared about the cats, and I don't know how many documentaries you've seen on him about how he was crazy, yes, but he wasn't like this crazy hermit shut in. But what was I saying? I'm sorry. Where was I going? What were we talking about?
I'm going to tell you where you're going.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Jurassic Park. He saw the dinosaurs, and he's like, "Oh my God, what I want to do with AI is not. We're not nearly there yet. Maybe Spielberg would be better." So he started leaning on Spielberg early, but he was still going to make the movie himself, from my understanding.
Anderson, before we go, can you where can listeners, viewers check your stuff out? Plug away, please. And BarryLyndon.com, maybe? No, sorry. Hello.
Yeah, Barry Lyndon was just it was him just ramping up for Napoleon, which never happened. But that was what Barry Lyndon was him just experimenting with various things that he could do. It wasn't so much a film as it was a workshop for him. I think that's why the movie's no good.
Oh, very good. And where can we find groupers? All your other stuff?
Yeah, AndersonCowan.com has all of my projects right there, links, and you can see the little artwork for. Have you seen my new website?
Yes.
You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna say yes. No, I'm kidding. No, your website looks really good, Anderson. I promise to do some stuff because I still have some podcasts from Flicks Today I gotta upload, but it's really good, Anderson.
Thanks,
you're the man. We love you. Thank you for joining us, Anderson.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Very quickly, Eric, Bruce, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
This Stanley Kubrick guy is pretty good.
Yeah.
Very, very astute, Eric. Bruce, okay, we always end with you. Say something astute.
No, don't make it end with me. End with Anderson. He's the guest.
Anderson, we're ending with you.
I was going to say this. We didn't hear nearly enough from Bruce. Every time I hear Bruce open his mouth, I always learn something or think about something that I never thought about before. And that goes for you too, Eric. But I mainly wanted to say that I feel like we didn't hear nearly enough from Bruce on this episode, and I blame me for that.
And thank you. I'm just that's a really nice thing that you just said about Bruce Anderson, and I'm gonna make sure, just because I knowing Bruce, I'm just gonna cut it out. Okay, guys, we will see you next week. Thanks again, Anderson Cowan, AndersonCowan.com, for joining us. Check out these Kubrick movies. Tell us what you think. All right, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.